Going live. Tonight's going to be fun for more than one reason. I've had some streaming issues with the Web Design 1 students. The last two live streams where my computer couldn't keep up. And this is the first time that I've installed Ubuntu 18.04. In fact, every year when we teach Web Design 2, it seems like there's a new version of Ubuntu because they release them every year. And so 18.04 changed a lot of things. For the better, a lot of the steps are condensed. So my outline that we'll be using tonight might be edited along the way. And my voice, if you can't tell, is a little hoarse tonight. I have a big mug of tea, which will hopefully get me through this. So we're all in this together, right? Sweet. People are in the chat room. Yep, the video's up. Perfect. All right, then we will get started. First, I have a special topic I wanted to bring up because we missed our Bootstrap lecture last week, and there were some good questions in the Slack chat room. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of the tricks that we use with Bootstrap to hide and show different content at different screen sizes. Let me get my face down here in the corner. So I believe that the exact question, if I remember right, was how in the world did you make this nav bar? And specifically, we're going to look at this current students one up at the top, the audience menu, where it says current students, employees, area businesses, and so on. Because on desktop, it's this thin bar up at the top. But on mobile, if I shrink this down just a little bit here, let me choose an iPhone 6 screen size here. You'll see that it's actually collapsed right here. And the word resources for appears. It's actually a button that isn't there on the desktop size, and it only appears on mobile. In fact, if I drag, can I resize this? If I go to responsive here, I have these little drag handles in Chrome. And so it appears, maybe this is the extra small size. This is the small size right about almost here. Okay, this is the small size. It's at medium where we have just enough room to display everything normally. And we get rid of that resources for menu and we show everything expanded. Now there's definitely some JavaScript happening here, and it's actually Bootstrap JavaScript. I think it might be their collapse option with a few tweaks. This was actually written with Bootstrap 3, so the class names is what I think was throwing everyone off when they were inspecting this with the web inspector. So I took a few minutes to make a very, very simple version in Bootstrap 4. It doesn't have the same content, but it has the same concepts. So let me switch over to VS Code. What I'm going to show you is I downloaded the Bootstrap starter. I left the H1 in here. It says hello world, and then I have two divs because everything's a div, right? A div that says this block is only shown on mobile, and a div that says this box is only shown on medium screens and larger. And then I made sure that divs have this black background and white text. So let's take a look at the end result. This is like a cooking show, right? So let me pull open my already baked souffle. Do you bake a souffle? I can't remember. Anyways, this is the end product here. We got the H1, and then there's this div. And notice how I said there were two divs. Only one is showing up on the screen here. That's exactly what we want, right? So if I open up the web inspector on this page, and I use the responsive design mode, which is that that two like a phone and an iPad looking icon down in the web inspector. If I show this, it's around this screen size, and I think it's right around 770 pixels. Maybe somewhere in between 768 and 770 is where it gets to the medium screen size. And you see that the text changes from mobile to medium screens and larger. So how in the world did I do it? Well, I wrote the two divs. There's really not much code to it. I didn't write any classes, any CSS for classes. I used the Bootstrap classes. And the way that this works is you specify the classes for the screen sizes that you want. So for the one that only shows up on mobile, we want to display this div like it normally would be as a block. So I have this d-block, right? This sets it to be a normal block. In fact, this class could probably go away because I think by default a div is a block, if we think back to Web 1. But the trick here is then I add another class that says d and then dash screen size medium. I want to change that to none. What does the none mean? Well, if I come back to the display property in the Bootstrap documentation, I clicked on documentation and then I clicked on display in the left-hand side. These are the different values that you can use. There's none, inline, inline block, block, table, table cell, table row, flex, and inline flex. These are actually properties, values of the display property in CSS. If you looked up on CSS Tricks or the W3C and looked up the word display as a CSS property, you'd see that these are real values. Bootstrap kind of makes those available as class names, but it makes multiple versions of them available. In fact, it makes versions of them available for the extra small screen size, which doesn't have a prefix to it. It's just D dash. And then every screen size after that, because it's mobile first, there is no extra small prefix. It's just the D. But then there's D dash SM dash one of these values, none, inline, block, etc. And that's also available on medium, large, and XL. So there's different screen sizes here. So you could literally make something that appears on just the extra large screen size. When might you do that? Well, if someone has a super wide monitor, you might actually display more content than you would normally display on just a regular laptop monitor. So the way this works, according to this documentation, is d-value or d-breakpoint and value. And this breakpoint should line up with some of the other work you've been doing with Grid and Bootstrap. They have these examples, which after I read the examples, I realized that none of these were as straightforward as I would like to show you. So they have all these combinations of, if you only wanted something to be visible on small, then you would pair d-none with, hide something only on the small side, you do d-none, and then on the next biggest size, you'd make it be a block. This is essentially what I did. I think if I had visible on medium is essentially what I would do. This is visible only on medium. I did visible on medium and above. So I wrote d-none and then d-medium block. They added another class at the next screen size to hide it again on large. The way these stack up on top of each other is these are written with media queries. So this is like a min width of 768 pixels. The next is large. This is a prefix of like medium, minimum screen size of like 1200. I don't know what the extra large screen size is there. So if I jump back to the code, you'll see that I have two divs on here. One that shows up on one screen size and one that shows up on another. And someone in the chat room said that you could use this for some accessibility purposes. You can, except when you hide things, you have to be careful that the information is visible at the right times. Like if you were adding a label, there's actually ways to hide things with the ARIA tag, the ARIA attribute itself, to have a description that's only read to screen readers, and that's one technique with adding extra stuff for screen readers. Really, this is more of a screen size. These classes that Bootstrap gives you, it's assuming that there is a visual component of the website. So I don't know if it's specifically the best solution for solving accessibility problems. It's great for changing layouts on different screen sizes, though, and that's what it was made for. So that's how I do that. Now imagine that this was instead the navbar, or the div that contains the navbar, or the div that surrounds the button that hides and shows the navbar. So if you take the concept from Web 1 where we created that hide a box, how there was a toggle class, we'd probably have that toggle thing that shows up, whether it's a button or a link or whatever it is, only appear on small screen sizes. And then the actual navbar itself would show up when the thing has been toggled and it's on a small screen, or all the time when it's on a bigger screen. And so with that concept of hide a box and JavaScript and these classes, I think you can make a lot of cool things. So does that answer your question? I will send that to the chat room. And I'm going to take a sip of tea while we get ready for the next topic. So we are in week 5. Oh, someone wanted a follow-up question. How does order play into it? The order of these classes largely doesn't matter because that they are tied to the media queries. So there is no media query on this D block. There's a media query on this. The very act of wrapping, what Bootstrap's doing underneath the covers of writing a media query and saying, at this screen size, this class means don't show it or means show it. Because they're wrapping it in a media query, it makes it more important or more specific. So it's going to apply even if I reverse these classes. So if I flip-flop them, which I'm willing to do right now, my hunch is everything will be the same. At least that's the dream, right? So if I refresh this and I shrink it, everything's working exactly the same way. The order matters for the people that are maintaining it, the humans. And I have to tell you, I've been trying to say this a few times in every live stream. If you can convince yourself to work mobile first, then you write in the order of what's the display going to be at mobile, at the smallest screen size. Well, I want it to be a block. What do I want it to do at the next highest screen size that I want it to change, at the next breakpoint where it changes? That's the next one that I put. I try to go extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. Now, I don't have classes for the large or the small in here. I skip those. I don't care about those breakpoints. I'm not changing what it is. So that means that it's going to be visible. It's going to be a block element through the small screen size all the way up to the medium, and that's when it changes to none. And then after that, it stays hidden. It's not going to be visible. With this other one, I want it hidden on the extra small size, or any size really, because it's going to be hidden from the baseline of 0 all the way up to whatever the medium or the minimum width of this medium size is, which we said was around 768. So order should not matter with these classes. The follow-up question to that was that you saw some forms that were being made using that, and things popped inline. Yeah, inline is one of the options here. Keep in mind that you can only, like, the last one wins out. If I had two different medium things that disagreed with each other, I wanted something to be a block and an inline on medium. Whichever one comes last is what wins out. So if I had medium block and then medium inline, inline is what would win out. If you need a reminder on what block and inline do, those are layout modes that are pretty well covered in our chapter. I don't know which one off the top of my head, but inline is typically things that don't start on a new line, and they don't have a width. They don't take up the whole width necessarily. They take the width as their content by default. A block is something that takes up the whole width, and then it starts on a new line. So it'll basically cut off from where it was before and go down to the next space where it has room to grow. Okay, cool. I did cover it. Excellent. Let's switch over, man. Let's go to week 5, where the main event is getting used to the command line. I actually really like this chapter because I haven't used all of the grunt and gulp build processes. Someone on my team has been using those a lot, and some of them have been replaced with some cooler things. I think Webpack was mentioned in there alongside Post CSS, and we're building a new website for the college where we're using some of those automated tasks to minify our CSS or to add the prefixed browser classes that are needed. Or my favorite trick to get the maximum speed out of our new website is it looks through all of our HTML source code and JavaScript source code, and it figures out what classes we're going to use. It kind of counts up every class name that's ever used, and then it will go through the final CSS file, and it will just delete anything that is not being touched. It's like tree shaking in a way, so it gets rid of all the code that isn't used. So it's allowing us to build a new version of our website that's incredibly fast. I am not going to tell you when it's going to launch because that would jinx ourselves. We're getting close, though. We're going to have a new front page that looks exactly like the current one, hopefully in the coming weeks here. So those build processes that are covered in the chapter are pretty cool. I think in general, she introduces you to the concept of Git and some command line tools. You are actually going to get some hands-on experience with command line tools by building a web server. And what we're going to do tonight, assuming all of our technology cooperates, is looks like my computer went offline here. we are going to install Ubuntu Linux 1804. And if you have never installed Linux before, let me fix my computer here real quick. Do not disturb. We don't need that up. Okay. So we're going to install Linux. Now, I don't want you to wipe your computer that you're using for homework, because that would be bad. You lose everything that you've started working on. What we're going to do is use a concept called virtualization. Modern computers are so powerful that you can actually run more than one operating system at once. You only have one primary OS, the one you boot into, whether that's Mac OS or Windows. I think we've got a student using Linux this semester. The computer has cycles to spare. It can actually send the commands from multiple operating systems and schedule them to run and make it actually look like you're running Windows and Mac at the same time. If you own a Mac, you can run Windows. If you have Ubuntu, you can run Windows inside of it. If you've never used Linux before, you can safely install it on your computer inside of a virtual machine. And it's like it's in its own separate computer. It can't touch any of your files. Your computer is safe. Now, when I started teaching Web 2 about 4 years ago, laptops weren't necessarily powerful enough. A lot of the laptops at the time still had 32-bit processors. I don't think I've had students in recent memory, within the last 2 years, that have had a 32-bit processor. So it's my hope that we'll be able to use VirtualBox version 6.0. And if you are on their download page, which I've linked to in Moodle, it says that as of version 6.0, they have discontinued support for 32-bit operating systems. So the link that I have in Moodle for the Ubuntu installation image is actually for 64-bit computers. If you find through this process that you have a 32-bit computer, I think we can still get everything running, but we'll need to get a different version of VirtualBox and a different version of Ubuntu for you to use. But fingers crossed, this works for everyone. I have installed Ubuntu an uncountable number of times. In fact, in Web Design 2, this class, you're going to install Ubuntu this week, and you're going to install it again next week for practice. I'm actually going to have you destroy or delete your VM and try starting over again next week. And then you're going to be installing something inside of it. And then for your final project, you're going to kind of practice it all over again. Because that's the only way I've been able to learn how to install Linux. And I've installed multiple versions of Ubuntu way back to version 10. I've installed 10, 11, 12, 14, 16, and now we're on 18. The process has changed, but a lot of the steps fall under certain themes. And I have tried to create a cheat sheet with the programming team at Mid-Michigan College that we're going to follow tonight. That outline that we're following is meant for version 16. So we're going to have to make some tweaks and adjustments along the way, because the version 18 installation process actually changed. It's a bit more graphical. It's pretty purple, I think. And they've removed some questions. They've made some assumptions about how computers and servers should be installed. And they've added a few additional things that we might have to add some notes about. So the first step for you, and I was hoping you could have this ready before tonight, is to install VirtualBox. What I've found with my Web Design 1 class when I'm live streaming is I can't do things that stress my computer out. Otherwise, the audio and the video really degrades. And so far, knock on wood, everything's held together tonight. So what I'm doing is I'm remote controlling another computer. I'm remote controlling, I think, my laptop sitting over in the corner over there. And it's running Mac OS, and it's running VirtualBox right here. So on this computer, if I go down to my dock here, I already have VirtualBox running, and it is VirtualBox version 6.0. I found the version by going to the VirtualBox menu and then About. So I know it's running. I have a VM that I had made for a conference that I attended here. But tonight, we're going to make a brand new Ubuntu VM. You will not be able to follow along if you haven't downloaded the Ubuntu ISO from Moodle. If I take you over here real quick, I have the VirtualBox download page linked in Moodle, and I also have this Ubuntu Linux ISO download for home use listed. This is going to take you to a download page. That's pretty here. And the thing that you need to download preferably is the server install image, the 64-bit version here. If you click and download it, it is a huge file. If I show this on my computer in my downloads folder here, and I open up the info, it is 851 megabytes. So if you think back to the size of a CDR, there were like 600 or 750 megabytes. This image here was originally distributed. This ISO was intended to be the CD. Like there used to be programs. I wish I could remember the names of some of these programs. But you'd give it an ISO and it would burn it to your disk. And then you take this shiny CD, and I did this for Ubuntu, and I'd go into the server room where it's loud and noisy. I'd slide the CD into the server, and then I'd use the keyboard to install Ubuntu when it booted off the CD. Nowadays, we don't have CD drives in our laptops or in our computers, and definitely not in our servers. So sometimes you might see people putting an ISO, expanding it onto a thumb drive. We've done that at the college. What's cool about a thing like VirtualBox, though, is it can understand what an ISO is. It can actually mount this ISO as if it were a CD, and it can let the machine boot off of it. So if I go into VirtualBox, I'm going to create a new VM. And over in the other corner here, I think I'm going to open up my VirtualBox notes. I'm going to try to zoom in here. And if anything's different, maybe call that out in the chat room here, or if you have access to edit or comment in here, maybe. Let's see, what are the share settings? Anyone can comment. So if something looks wrong, feel free to make a comment on here as to which one you think we need to adjust. I'll try to do it along the way. Oh, someone in the chat room said it was Nero. Yeah, that was definitely one of the programs that I used to burn discs. There was one for the Mac that was like, it was Toast. It was called Toast because it actually showed the CD like burning up, like as it was burning the disc. It was the coolest animation. I need to find that. Okay, so let's create a VM. We click the new button, and we are going to call this thing Ubuntu. And as you type in the word Ubuntu, it kind of guesses from the fact that you called it Ubuntu that you might be installing Linux, because that's what Ubuntu is. It's a version of Linux. Linux is like the core part of an operating system, and many people have built different versions on it. Different companies have. You may have heard of Red Hat or Debian or wow, now I'm blanking on other ones. Mandarin, isn't that one? CentOS, Debian, Jesse. I'm thinking of all the other versions of Linux I've heard of. Oh, Alpine is a new small version that's really lightweight. Ubuntu is probably one of the most popular. And the reason I like to talk about Ubuntu is actually Microsoft has partnered with them to allow you to actually install Ubuntu, the core parts of Ubuntu underneath Windows, so that if you are using a command line environment in Windows, you can actually run native bash commands. It's all part of Ubuntu. Actually, if you search the Windows Store for Ubuntu, you can download it. And it's not quite what we were doing here with a VM. We're actually going to run a fully fledged copy of Ubuntu inside of a little virtual computer that we create here. When you install it from the Windows Store, Microsoft has done the work to actually let Ubuntu and Windows work side by side, which is just very mind-boggling for a company like Microsoft to have done. All right, so I called mine Ubuntu. It's going to put this in my folder of VirtualBox VMs. It has wisely guessed that this is a Linux version, Ubuntu 64-bit, and I'm going to just click continue here. We don't need expert mode. Now it's going to ask you how many of your resources do you want to allow this virtual machine to do. You can actually give VirtualBox some parameters so that it doesn't slow down your whole computer. For our purposes this semester, this is a lightweight VM that we are not going to keep around. We're going to delete it and recreate it a bunch of times. I'm fine with going with the recommendations here of 1 gigabyte of memory. That's what 1024 megabytes would be. I'm going to click continue on the memory. And it's going to ask, do you want to create a hard drive? The recommended size is 10 gigabytes. This is actually going to create another virtual disk image. It's not an ISO, it's a different version, but it's actually like a little hard drive. Now, it's not going to use up 10 gigabytes on your computer. It's going to make a tiny little version of it that it's going to keep adding to, and the maximum size that it's going to be is 10 gigabytes. And it'll warn you when you get close to that in the OS. I have 10 gigabytes free, and I think this is fine, so I'm just going to click continue or create. It asks which version do you want to use for the hard disk image. We're fine using the recommendations here. And this is the question here. Do you want to allocate all 10 gigabytes right now? Which we do on our servers that we run at the college. We allocate all that space right away so we don't accidentally create too many VMs and then run out of space as we're actually using all those ones and zeros. For your laptop or your personal computer, for a VM that we're not really going to keep around, dynamically sizing is perfectly appropriate. It gives you a prompt to ask, what do you want to call this hard drive? And it lets you adjust the size. I'm good with this recommendation. And just like that, we have created another PC, another computer that we can turn on. It is powered off right now. It has this little power icon here. It says it's powered off. Before we power it on, I do want to change a setting that's going to make our lives a lot easier here at the end. And it looks like we have a question in the chat room. Would you recommend a Pi for something like this long term? I like Raspberry Pis. I actually got one for Christmas. It's sitting up here, and I have not finished putting it together. You can install a small version of Linux on there. I forget what Raspberry Pi calls this OS. It's like Raspbian or something like that. It runs software just like Ubuntu, and they're cheap. I think they're like 30 or 40 bucks to make a Raspberry Pi. That would be great as a web server. I don't know if they're powerful enough to run VMs, like if you want to run multiple computers on it, but it's definitely powerful enough to run a little test website on. Okay, so before we boot up this PC, we are going to go to the settings for it. And I want us to go to the network section. Yes. So by default, when you create this little computer, it's going to create a brand new network for it, where it is going to be able to use your internet connection. That's not the problem. But what it's going to do is create a private network that has a different IP address than your computer does. And it's not going to allow us to connect to that version of the computer that's running, that virtualized computer, from our main computer. Like, there won't be an IP address that we can type in to get to it. So we're going to trick it. There is an option in VirtualBox called Bridged Adapter. And what Bridged Adapter does, at least what I thought it purported to do. Hold on a second. I have to check a network setting on my computer before I go further here. Yeah, you get to choose what network you want it to connect to. I do not want it to be on either of these, though. Ethernet. Normally, the default option is going to work for everyone on this. What we're trying to do, let me say that first before I get caught up in my troubleshooting here. We're going to tell this PC to actually get its own IP address from your cable modem or your router, and actually make it look like this computer, this one computer that's plugged into your network or is on the Wi-Fi, to make it look like it has two separate computers running in it. It has two IP addresses. One of the IP addresses is going to be for your VM. One of the IP addresses is going to be for your regular computer. And that's actually important because it's going to allow us to type in that IP address to look at the website that we're hosting. So I am going to very quickly turn on my Wi-Fi on this computer because it is currently disabled. Because it says that it wants to use my Wi-Fi. And I want that to be in the bridge mode, and I'm going to click OK. And now we're going to click the start button. This is actually like you're hitting the power button on a computer. The first time, looks like on my Mac I have to give it some accessibility access. That's fun. VirtualBox. You are allowed to control my computer. Okay, so the first time that we power on this computer, there's no operating system yet. We called it Ubuntu, but we haven't installed Ubuntu yet. We just created a PC. It's like we went to a store, bought a computer, and just sat it on our desk, and there's nothing installed on it yet. We're going to insert a CD, but it's not a real CD, of course. We're going to click the little browse icon here, folder icon, and we're going to look for an image, the ISO image that we downloaded. So with any luck, it'll be in your downloads, and it's going to be that Ubuntu 1804 live server .iso file. I'm going to select it, and this is like I'm inserting a CD into the computer. I'm going to click Start, and this is like the BIOS screen that flashes by. Boy, it's tiny. Let's see if I can zoom it up here. Hurry up. And you can see the text streaming by as the computer boots off of that CD image that we provided it. This is going to be tough to see. How can I zoom this to be bigger? Virtual screen. Okay, we're going to scale it up double. There we go. I can read that. Wonder if I can zoom it any bigger. I clicked on that monitor here. I'm going to zoom it up to 250%. I can see that. How about you? Okay, so when it finally finishes booting, it's going to take us to an installation wizard. Has everyone been able to get this far when they tried it? Let me know in the chat room. The first thing that it's going to ask is what our language is. And when you put your cursor inside of here, your mouse is going to disappear because this is not a GUI. This is a command line. There is no mouse right now. And when we're done installing it, because we downloaded the server image, there is not going to be any sort of mouse support. It is just a typing command line utility that you're going to be using. So say goodbye to the GUI. You lose it as soon as you move your cursor in here. In fact, you might not be able to get the cursor out. If you get stuck, I think you can hit Control and Alt to get your mouse back as you move out. At least in VirtualBox 6 on my Mac, I haven't had that problem where I can't get the mouse back. I just move my mouse outside and it comes back automatically, which is nice. So how do you move around? Well, at the very top of my document here, I give you some useful command line keyboard shortcuts. The first is if you want to select something like a checkbox or a button, the space button is like pressing in with your finger. It is great for selecting. Everyone likes to hit enter, but enter actually means go forward and finish what I've selected. So there will be at least 1 or 2 screens where we have to use the space bar to select things. How do you move from one button to another or from one text box to another? Well, that's tab. It's a lot like filling out a form on the internet. The arrow keys, it's great for moving when you're within a text field, or you can also use it for moving between fields sometimes too, or in this case, we can move it up or down if we wanted to change our language. If at any point you want to go back, escape is your friend. The escape key continues to be something that I just try to hit whenever something isn't working right. That's why I'm so frustrated that my iPad doesn't have an escape key by default, because I wish I could just hit escape sometimes. On my keyboard here, I can hit escape to get back. And then enter, like I said, that usually means, okay, I'm done entering stuff in. Let's move on to the next screen. And sometimes that might be a bit premature. So let's try to use space, and I'll point out when I use space instead. So arrow up and down to choose your language. We're fine with enter. Notice that it says how far we are through this installation. We're already on step 1 of 11. If I hit enter, it's going to ask what type of a keyboard you're using. I find that these defaults are okay. So where are we at in these notes? When prompted, connect the ISO. You can use command option to get out. Hit enter a bunch. Okay, all right. So generally speaking, a lot of these default screens are okay. The first one that we're going to want to change is when it asks us our name, I think. So let's hit enter on this keyboard. We're done on this. And it's going to ask, what do you want to do? Do you want to install from the disk, or do you want to install something from the cloud? We're fine using our disk here. And then it asks you to configure your network. Ooh, this is a different order. So it detected one, and it detected an IP address. That's 192.168.7. I think that's good. If I go look at my Wi-Fi on my computer, I'm going to move this over here. My computer's IP address on Wi-Fi is a 192.168.7.87. So my VM looks like it's automatically getting an IP address from my router. Let's see if it works if I hit enter. Yeah, that worked. It was able to connect to my router and get an IP address. That is awesome. This screen where it asks you to use a proxy, we do not need to use. So somewhere in here, it asks about a proxy. The network screen, hopefully it will show an IP address similar to your computer's. You do not need to configure a proxy to download software. A proxy, you might be installing Ubuntu on a server network, like at a college, like mid. I worked at an institution once where the servers didn't have access to the internet. We actually had to route their traffic temporarily through a different connection. And then after we were done installing anything from the outside world. When you have to deal with things like HIPAA compliance or medical records, that type of access is really locked down because you don't want your server to be able to connect to the internet randomly. But in our case, we don't need a proxy to connect to the internet, so I'm going to hit done. It's going to ask you where do you want to download your software from, because after you get Ubuntu installed off the CD, we're going to run some updates, and it's going to download that from the Ubuntu servers. I don't know of a faster one than the default, so we're just going to go with that. It's going to ask us how to partition the disk. Now, this is not partitioning or formatting your computer. This is only formatting that virtual disk that we created. So we created that 10 gigabyte drive. It has nothing on it right now. Ubuntu is asking, can I use all of this 10 gigabytes? And I think we do. So we are going to use the entire disk. You can use an entire disk to install Ubuntu. This is the virtual disk that we created, 10 gigabyte for the VM, and not your computer's drive, thankfully. So I'll be able to get rid of all of that. So let's use the entire disk. You can tell that it's that 10 gigabyte disk because it has 10.000G. Let's let it use it. And it's going to summarize how big it is and how it's going to partition it. If you've taken the operating systems class at mid, you probably are familiar with how computers might need swapped disk space on the computer to take whatever's in memory and put it to disk so it can do something else. Ubuntu's smart. It's going to recommend exactly what it needs. So I'm just going to hit done. Now, it is going to warn you that this could be destructive. If you were actually booting your whole computer off of that thumb drive or that CD and you were going through this process, you could wipe out Windows. You cannot do that because we're using VirtualBox, and we gave it a pretend hard drive that it's going to write to. So are you sure you want to continue? This is where I'm going to move the arrow key down or hit tab to go down. Notice how it's red because it's dangerous. I'm going to hit continue. And this is where we need to put our name. So I'm going to use my mid username because I'm so used to typing bkish. I am going to suggest that you choose a password that is not something you're going to forget, for one, because you're going to need it to log in. But also, I'd probably pick something that isn't your normal safe password. I can't tell you for sure if it's going to show my password when I type it, so I'm going to pick something that's not a good password that you should probably never use. Password 123, let's say. I'm going to enter my name here, Brandon Kish. You get to name your server. So I like to come up with fun names. It can't have spaces or anything like that, but I'm going to call it Kishbuntu. That sounds fun. And I'm going to pick my username of bkish. And let's type a password. Good, it's starred out here. But I'm going to make it something that I am going to be able to remember in a few minutes. If you were installing a server on an institution's network, you would definitely want to pick really secure passwords. And then I'm going to tab down to done. You also get to name your server something fun. We have some fun server names at the college at mid. I think our old web servers used to be called Spikehorn because if you'd seen some of the photographs hanging up on campus, there was someone that used to raise bears up in Harrison, and I think their name was Spikehorn, and so we had a server named Spikehorn and a server called the Bear. Make sure you remember your password. And like I said, I recommend not using a regular strong password for this test VM. Next, it's going to ask you, server snaps. What are these? These must be like pre-configured packages that you can set up. We're not going to use any of these. In order to use these, you would actually go up and down, hit the space bar to check the things that you want. We're not setting up any of these, but they look really sweet. I want to know what Mosquito is. I've never set up a Mosquito server or a Wormhole. We have used Postgres or Heroku. We definitely have done Docker in the past, but we don't need any of these packages. The one that I am going to be looking for is a package called OpenSSH Server, and I think that's on a later screen. So unless I'm missing it here, yeah, I don't see OpenSSH anywhere. So I'm just going to tab down to Done and then hit Enter. So it tells us that it's configuring some things. Oh, we're on to the reboot step. So we might not even get an opportunity to choose OpenSSH server. It might choose it automatically. So I might get to delete more of these notes. This is even better than it was before. So let's choose reboot. Oh, someone else knows Spikecorn. That's awesome. Okay, so it is getting ready to reboot. It's saying to please remove the installation medium, then press enter. So if I look down in the corner here, I have some icons for my VM. One of them is going to be the CD. And it looks like it's not actually connected. This little CD icon would be lit up. I think it's been ejected. So I'm going to click in here and just hit enter, and let's see if it reboots. Now, if it were to reboot and ask me to install Ubuntu again, then I'm guessing it didn't unmount your installation CD that we had mounted. But it looks like this is behaving a little bit different than it did before. So fingers crossed that it is installed and it will boot up. This is a good sign, everyone. Someone asked me if I read all of these messages. Generally, when I see a lot of green like this, I don't read it. And if I see a bunch of red, then I might try to read what's going by, because it might indicate that something's going wrong. Seems to still be booting. Okay. It looked like it showed my login prompt, and then it had this extra output that appeared on the screen. I just hit enter at the end there to get back to my Kishbuntu login. So the way Linux is set up is you have a user account. You can have multiple users on the server or on the machine, but no one can use the computer unless you actually log in. So hopefully you remember your username and your password that you had chosen. I'm going to log in as myself for the first time here. Notice that it had said this is Ubuntu 18.04.01. Oh, and I already typed in the wrong password. Let's try this again. I remember the very first time that I ever installed Linux. I was in middle school, and I was I thought my computer couldn't run Linux because I got to that password prompt and I was typing stuff in on the keyboard and no characters showed up. It turns out that most Linux distributions don't show you typing any characters because I think as a security issue, they didn't want people to know how long their passwords were. So if you find yourself typing and nothing appearing on the screen, don't freak out. Just type your password and hit enter. And hopefully you get this screen where it says welcome. You've logged in. You'll see some information in here that there are 158 packages that can be updated, 73 security updates. It tells you a little bit about Ubuntu here. And then it returns you down to this bkish at kishbuntu $. And this is the prompt. This is the shell that we are in. If you read the chapter in the textbook, she kind of abbreviated this down to just like the $$ is the bash prompt. This is where we type our commands and we get stuff back. So I do want to show you a few commands that you can run. Let me delete this from the notes. Log in with your username and password. Okay, we're gonna connect to our VM. Oh, you know what? We should do this now, because can someone tell me, can you read the text on this terminal, or is it too thin? I think I'd like to know that before I continue on here. I'm going to sip my tea while I wait for a response. So my question is, can you read the text? I know it's white on black, and it's very thin, even though I've zoomed it up pretty big. If that... Oh, someone's saying that they can read it fine. Okay, then I'm going to continue on inside of here. This is this is the computer. This is as if I was sitting at a computer screen. I would see all of this on there. I wouldn't have a cursor. I wouldn't see any windows. I just see this black screen. Oh, someone else can't read it. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. When I logged in here, it told me the IP address of this machine. It's 192.168.7.99. If I didn't know that IP address, I could log in and I could run a command that I thought was in here. So connect to the IP address. So if you don't know the IP, log in and run the ifconfig command. Okay, so this is the first program. ifconfig shows you all the network information for the Linux box. And one of these devices, the LO, is the loopback. That exists on every machine, so it can communicate with itself. This top line here looks like it's connected to my Wi-Fi network here at home. It's 192.168.7.99. I wish I could call this out really, but I can't. That's the IP address that I want you to make note of. So over here in my notes, I'm going to just write down that it was .7.99. I love VirtualBox. I do not like typing in VirtualBox though, because I can't copy and paste. I can't click and drag over something and copy it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of just pretend that VirtualBox is running on a computer far away. And I'm actually just going to hide VirtualBox or minimize it on Windows. And actually, I'm going to hide my screen sharing too. I'm going to go back to my main computer here. If you are on Windows, I included a link in Moodle this week to a program called Putty. You can download the installer here for a 64-bit machine or a 32-bit machine. Install Putty, and this is a shell that you can use to connect over a protocol called SSH to another computer that's ready to communicate over SSH. In this case, our Linux machine is, I believe. So on a Mac, though, it comes built in. So if you go to the Finder and you open up your Applications folder, where all your apps are installed, there's a Utility folder, Utilities. And in Utilities is my favorite program that ships on the Mac. It's the Terminal app. This terminal is like a command line interface like we've been using so far. And I can blow it super wide here. Let me know if you can see that. I know you said you're on your iPad. Let me know if this is big enough text, please, in the chat room. So I can do commands here that will affect my Mac, but what we're going to do now is actually connect to that virtual machine that we're running, right? So we need to know the IP address, and we're going to use a program called SSH. If you're using Putty, you open up Putty and you enter the connection information, the IP address and the username there. On the Mac here, I actually use the SSH program. I'm going to type SSH, and what I'm going to send to this SSH program is my username at, and then the IP address of the machine. So I believe that was 192.168.7.99. So it's a lot like an email address, essentially. It's your username at the IP address of the computer. The first time, if you hit enter, it's going to try to connect. And look, this is good. This is a good sign. I am able to connect right now. But it's warning me, I don't recognize this computer. Do you want to remember this going forward? And you have to type yes to continue. And what's happening is every time you establish this connection to the server for the first time, if you trust the computer, it'll remember its identity. And then the next time you connect, it won't prompt you with this again. But if something happened and that server changed, like some other Linux server, someone plugged in a Linux server in my network and I tried to connect to the same IP address and it wasn't the one I was expecting, I would get a big warning message about how something's not right. This is not the computer you were expecting to connect to. So I'm going to say yes to to continue here, and then it's going to ask me for my password. So I'm going to use that same password that I set up before, and you'll notice a few things. I get the exact same information as I logged in before, but I'm in this terminal on my Mac, and I've configured it to be white on black, but I've also still have my cursor though, so I can click and drag and select, and on the Mac I can actually use Command-C and Command-V to copy and paste. On Windows, on PuTTY, it's a little bit different. As you click and drag to select something, if you hit enter, I think, it automatic, or maybe you don't even enter, you just click and drag. I think as soon as you click and drag, it copies what you've selected, and then if you wanted to paste, I think you just right click. The very act of right clicking pastes in what you want. It's a little weird to get used to, but I know someone who, he has a computer on my team, but on his screen when you look by, it's just like PuTTY after PuTTY session, and he's just right clicking to paste. Like, he's got all these monitors, but he has no GUI. He has Chrome, and then he has like 6 versions of these Windows open, and he's just typing in commands to different servers. Oh, good, you can read that. That's good. So this is where I want to go over some Linux commands, and let me just hit enter here so I can move my cursor up from the bottom, and you can read it here. I'm going to put my cheat sheet underneath. I'm going to blow this up a little bit bigger. There are some commands that you might want to run someday. If you're going to run a Linux server, you might want to update software. And so you can actually run apt. I think it's just apt is the name of the software now. You can run apt update. But in order to run it, you have to be a super user. I want to talk about this concept in a minute. I'm just going to run this here. I'm going to run sudo apt update, and it's going to ask me for my password. And apt, if I could type my password right, is what Ubuntu uses to look for software. So if I wanted to install a software package like Chrome or something like that, I could type in the name of the package and it would go download it. I don't have to go to a website. I just ask Ubuntu for a package, it finds it, and it installs it. Apt is great. It's really easy to use, but installing software is a really important decision. Like, you don't want just any user who's using your server to be able to install software. So there's this concept of people that have the ability to run super user commands or super user do. So I love to show off this comic from XKCD. It's one of my favorites. Where did it go? I'll search for it. It's XKCD sudo, and the comic is called Sandwich. If you try to run a command, like make me a sandwich, it will say, what? Make it yourself. And the trick is to say sudo make me a sandwich, and the computer or the person has no choice but to comply. This I find very humorous because I will try very often to just run apt update, and it's going to give you errors. Problem, could not open the file, you do no permission, blah, blah, blah. Like, you run that command, you're like, what did I do wrong? It's not working. Is the internet broken? No, what's wrong is I didn't say sudo apt update. And it just works that time because I typed my password within 5 minutes ago, so it just knows that I'm a super user, and it runs the update command. So there's this concept of having the ability to do certain things, and in our exercises, you are going to have to run sudo a few times to make changes to files, to change configuration, or to restart or install software. You might have to use that sudo. If you type the command without it, that's okay. You'll get an error message, and you just run it with sudo in front of it, and it will likely work. So that's a nice aside. Let's talk about some sample commands. The first one that our textbook talks about is pwd, and I love this one. Sometimes I'll forget what folder I'm in. There's a concept of when you type a command, it is running against the files that are in the folder that you're in, and I often lose track of where I'm at. If you type pwd and hit enter, it shows you on the file system I am at /home/bkish. So you probably have your own home folder that you're in right now. Every user you create gets a home folder. You can get out of the home folder, and this is a lot like working with the URL. If I type cd space ... this actually moves a folder higher. If I type pwd here, I'm in the home folder now. If I want to go all the way back up to the top folder, I can type /cd/ space /, and now If I want to see the files that are in here, I can type ls. And these are the folders that are at the top level of the hard drive on this Linux box. You probably wouldn't edit many of these. You're probably likely to just stay inside of your home folder. If you want to get back, our author showed this tip that you can just type CD, and that moves you to your home folder automatically. I used to think that you had to type CD and then tilde to get you to your home folder. But this concept of moving directories is a lot like the concept that you've been working with to link to files in different folders. But you have to have this little mental model of where you're at. Luckily, if you're in any folder that's not your home folder, this tilde, it actually tells you kind of what folder you're in the command prompt of Ubuntu, which is nice. So I'm in home folder here. Let me go back to my folder. If I type ls, I don't have any files in here. They talked about in the book this -la flag. If you type -la, it's going to list everything. And so these are some of the hidden files that are in my home folder. It has a file that tells you that I have successfully run sudo myself. It has some cache folders. It has some scripts that run when I log out or log in. These are all in my home folder, but they begin with a period, so they're hidden by default. So I'm in this folder. What if I wanted to organize things? If I want to make another folder? Well, there's this make directory command, mkdir. So I'm just going to call it my folder. I separate the command with a space, and then I type what I want the folder to be named. If I type ls, I can see my folder sitting there. If I ls-la, I see all of the files, and then I see my folder hanging out in there. So we've used pwd, make directory, list, cd you saw me use, so I can actually go into my folder, cd my folder, and you did not miss anything. I did not type my folder out letter by letter. There's awesome tab complete, just like in Visual Studio Code and Atom and the Web Inspector. You just type the first couple letters, and it will try to autocomplete to the next available name that it knows. And if there's two things called my folder, it'll stop and wait for you to type another character. And then I hit enter, and now I am in /home/bkish/my folder. We've created a folder. What if I want to create a file? What if I wanted to make an index.html? That's what the touch command is. You can actually touch a file to create it or to change its modification date. I'm just going to create index.html. And if I ls, you'll see I have an index.html. I don't have anything in that file. If I want to see what's in the file, I could actually run cat, which I don't know why it's named cat and not dog, but I'm going to cat to look inside of the file. I'm going to type index.html. You'll see that it's blank. It doesn't have anything in it. If I want to actually edit the file, you have to actually use a command line text editor, and there's a lot available. I know someone that loves Vim. Vim is very confusing, and although I've started using it, I find that Nano is more approachable. So Nano is the name of the program. You tell it the file that you want to open up, and it's like a text editor. It's a lot like Notepad. It doesn't have any color coding, and it doesn't have any autocomplete. It does have find and replace and save, and it actually shows you those commands at the bottom. The caret character represents the control key, and then the character like X is just a key on the keyboard. You do control X to exit, or control O to write out. That means save. Control W for where is lets you search the file. You can cut and uncut text, or you can just type in. So I'm going to make a very invalid web page that just says hello world. Look at that. It's color coded, my friends. That's pretty sweet. I want to exit, so I'm going to control X, and it's going to say, hey, wait, you have changes you haven't saved. And it asks you, what do you want to do? If you want to save the buffer, you can hit Y. It asks you, what file do you want to call this? We're going to let it be index.html and hit enter. And now if I ls-la, you'll see that it's been modified just a minute ago, and I can cat index.html. And there's the contents of my file. Now, the author mentions this command as well. Man is a way for you to read the manual for any command. So if you wanted to know what the touch command does, type man touch, and this is everything you need to know about the touch command. There's a name, synopsis, description. If you go down, you can see all the flags that you can give it. So you can tell it what date you want it to have a modification date of. You can tell it to output the version of this program. You can read all about this. If you want to get out, you can hit Q to quit, and then you're back at the command line. Oh, I did put the sudo command in here. It's just further down. Okay, so what we want to do now is actually run a web server. We connected over SSH, so we have an SSH server installed as part of Ubuntu, but we don't have a web server yet. Or so I think. Let's double check this. I'm going to go into Chrome on my computer and try to connect to this computer. I'm typing in the IP address. Oh, look at that. It says there's nothing hosted on here. So we need to install some software. At the top of this cheat sheet, maybe it's not at the top. Where is it? Oh, yeah, it's a little bit later down in step 9 here. I have a link to a guide that we're going to be using for installing software, Apache. Let's get you kind of amped up to use some command line tools, though. Let's install a different package first. We're going to install a web browser. It's not Chrome. We're going to run sudo apt install links. You may have heard of this before, LYNX. This is a full-blown web browser. I'm going to say yes to install it. The way links works is it's a command line program. You type in links and then the place you want to go. So I'm going to do midmich.edu. You'll see that I'm getting redirected. It's requesting a web page. It's saying, do you want to allow cookies? So I'm just going to say A for always. And I'm going to always allow going to this web page. So it actually brought up midmich.edu. This is the Mid-Michigan College website. Notice how what it actually displays are I think I hit A, so I probably went too far back. No, I don't want to quit. Let's go there again. I think I hit too many keys. I was expecting to see our logo. I want to allow this cookie. Okay, here we go. This is what I wanted to see. So up at the top is the title in purple, Mid-Michigan College, Mount Pleasant, Harrison, get more at mid. Then the first thing that appears is an iframe for the Google Tag Manager. Creepy, creepy us. But you can see our nav bar. This is the audience bar. This is the mobile size nav bar, essentially. It has our quick links for jobs, directory portal. Then it has the resources for menu, and it has the audiences. Now, I've always wondered what happens when I hit resources for in the command line. It doesn't go anywhere, it looks like. It just leaves you on the same page. That's pretty funny. So I'm going to keep moving down the web page. I can see our logo represented as text. This is where alt text is really important. There's buttons to apply, get info, or visit. Oh, there's a search box. You can search the website. You go through the nav bar here. See the description of an image that says student browses the Mount Pleasant campus bookstore. This is what the internet used to be like at one point in time, everybody. Anyways, links is a text version web browser that I love to use to make sure that we've added alt text to all of our images. All right, so to get out of here, it says Q to quit. I'm going to hit Q, and it's going to say, are you sure you want to quit? I'm going to say yes, and I'm back out. So we've installed links as a package. The command for that, if I hit up arrow, you'll see was sudo apt install links. We're going to now install something a little bit harder. We are going to install a full-blown web server. We've talked about clients and servers in Web 1, where the client is your web browser. The server is something that you've just been sending requests to. You type in an address, a URL, and that somehow gets routed to the server, and it sends you back a web page. We're going to try hosting our own in Web 2. The one that we use the most is Apache. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you have the latest list of packages. I think I ran this earlier, but the command is sudo apt update. That downloads a list of all the software Ubuntu knows about. And then I can run sudo apt install Apache 2. It tells you it's going to install some other software while it does this. These are considered dependencies. We want to say yes here for it to install everything. And now it's doing the hard work of downloading the package, installing it, getting it set up. It tells you its progress. A lot of this is going to vary based on your internet connection. Now, unfortunately, by default, this is not going, I don't think that this is going to work. I'm going to go back to my other tab here and refresh the web page. Oh, it did. Look at that. The guide that we follow assumes that you might have like a firewall installed on your Ubuntu server. So we're going to visit this article a couple times throughout the semester. Step 1 here of installing Apache and updating the firewall. the main commands here are here, but you might have to adjust your firewall to allow all traffic through so that the ports that are used by a web server are opened up. It looks like we didn't have to do that. My cheat sheet still has that in there, and you might want to do that for practice. But we've already installed Apache. So if you now go into your browser and type in http:// whatever the server IP was, so 192.168.7.99, you're running a web server. Now, this isn't a beautiful website, but it is a web page, and you could use the web inspector on it. Let's go try to change that web page. In my cheat sheet, I tell you where that file is kept. And under 10b, I tell you that these files are kept in /var/www/html. So if you think back to that list of commands that I showed you, cd lets us change directories. We're going to go into /var/www/html. And if I ls, there is an index.html in there. And if I open up nano on index.html, it is that page that we were looking at. If you don't believe me, you can come in here and change something. So I'm going to use Control-V to skip down page by page because there's a lot of CSS in here. Go up with Control-Y. Let's just add something at the top of the body that just says, hello, Twitch. And we're going to output that with Control-O to write it out and hit Enter. Now that, oh, look at that. Error writing index.html. Permission denied. I warned you about this, right? I said that some commands are going to fail. So I'm going to exit. We could have typed sudo nano index.html. And that would have allowed us to edit and save it. However, I would like to introduce you to another command called chown. Change owner. So we know that our user is bkish. If you didn't know that, you can type who am I. It tells you what your name is, bkish. This is helpful if you keep changing users and you don't know who you are. Like you're switching between accounts. So bkish is actually who we want to be able to edit this file. And if I just do an ls-la, you'll see that the owner listed here is actually root. So I'm not root. I become root when I type sudo. Instead of using sudo to edit this file, though, can we maybe change index.html to be owned by bkish? So this is our last trick here. We could run chown to do that. We have to start with sudo, though, because we need to have the permissions to do it. So we're going to sudo chown index.html. And let's look at my cheat sheet here. Oh, actually, instead of typing the file name, we have to type the user that needs access. So we want bkish to be able to use it. And I could type index.html, which would change that file. I actually want to change this directory. That's what the period means, where I'm currently at. I could also do star if I want to do everything in the directory. We're going to use period. And now if I ls-la, you'll see that not only, oh, sorry, I guess bkish owns the directory, but bkish doesn't own everything. So I guess I have to do both. I'm going to up arrow here, and instead of the period, do the star. And if I ls-la, there we go. bkish is now the owner of this directory and of index.html. Because I own this index.html file, I can edit it. And because I own the directory, I can actually make a new page. So I can touch brandon.html. And I'm going to open that up in Nano. And I'm going to type in that hello world web page real quick. And I can go to my web server. Remember, it's my IP address. I'm going to go to /brandon.html. There's our web page, folks. Now, the actual challenge that I want you to complete here is to upload a web page that you've already created in Web 1 or even already in Web 2. So you are going to have to run these chown commands so that you have the ability to create files in here. I am not asking you to type in your entire web page again. There is another program that you can use that instead of connecting by SSH, you can actually connect and upload files. So you use this program in Web 1. I think it was called CyberDuck. And I think I have that linked in this cheat sheet here. If you're on a PC, oh, you know what? I don't have CyberDuck listed. I thought I did. Oh yeah, so right here, in step 10 here, connect with CyberDuck or WinSCP. I think I have CyberDuck on here. If I open up CyberDuck, I'm sorry, tonight's stream is so long. Come on, computer. Okay, CyberDuck is opening up. I don't want to do any of the things it's asking me. I'm going to disconnect because I'm already connected to something. I'll click Open Connection. And we want to connect with SFTP, which is the SSH File Transfer Protocol. SFTP right there. And the server is the IP address, 7.99. It's still your username and password. Hopefully it connects and it's going to show you your home folder. We want to not be in /home. We're going to go up to / and I think it was /var /www/html. This is where my brandon.html file is. If I have the right permissions, if I own this folder, I could actually drag something in. So I could drag in this test.html that I created earlier. And because no errors, I think it uploaded. I'm going to come over to this and go to test.html. And there, my friends, is that Bootstrap display utility example that we created earlier today running on a web server. We did it, everybody. We installed Ubuntu, we installed a web server, we set permissions, we typed a bunch of commands, and we uploaded a website. You're running your own web server. You can access this website from any other device on your router right now. You should, if your phone is on the same Wi-Fi network, you should be able to go to that IP address, 192.168 or whatever it is. Maybe it's a different type of IP address. You should be able to type it in and visit your web page. I'd love for you to be able to see it on your phone. This is an important milestone, and I'm glad we have people in the chat room to witness it working for the first try. This is going to take practice. There's a lot of commands in here that are foreign. We're going to do more research with command line utilities next week as well, and you're going to have the opportunity to reinstall a brand new VM and get everything in place. I think this has prepared you for all of that. All I can tell you is practice, practice, practice. Your midterm project is one of the components, one of the requirements is to actually run a web server to host your midterm project, and then demonstrate to me that you can access it from like your phone or something like that on your Wi-Fi network. Now that you're probably wondering, like, do I have to keep this virtual machine forever? You don't. You can try to keep it. What I will warn you is when we did this in the computer lab at mid, if the computer restarted, I got locked out. If the computer restarted and then you restarted your VM, sometimes you get a different IP address. And as long as you can figure out what that new IP address is, you're fine. You can access it again. But there might be times where that network connection just doesn't work the same way. Like the name of the network adapter has changed, especially if you're going in between campuses. Like you take your laptop and you plug it in, then you go to Wi-Fi. Some of that might break. So what I would really caution you on is be okay with deleting this VM, destroying it, letting it delete the disk, and just reinstall Ubuntu. We recorded it live here. We did it in under an hour, the actual installation. As long as you keep that ISO handy, you can reinstall Ubuntu as many times as you want. I am so excited that we were able to get through all of this tonight. Do you have any questions in the chat room? Oh yeah, someone says that they remember what it's like using VirtualBox in a lab. Yeah, it did not stay pretty. Okay, well, if there are no questions, I will leave it to you to practice this. Hit me up on Slack. You can use our team channel. I know we had some discussions in there in the last week, and I'm so excited to see us using it. Let me know how your virtual machine turns out, and I'll see you again next week.